here's what I think about what this means for the long-term future of the rebuild.
Yeah.
It's not good. You don't want this.
Right.
Even if you want to maximize your lottery odds, like, you don't want it to feel like this.
My pal Varun Shankar just sat down here at Capital One Arena. I might be scooped this way just a
Sounds
little
good.
bit. We'll get you right in the frame. Voila. Look how beautiful
Look at
we
that.
look. Look how beautiful we look. Varun is, of course, the Washington Post beat reporter covering the Wizards, and we're going to talk about them in just a second. Just a bit of breaking news to pass along before we begin. Brian Johnson, the Commanders' pass game coordinator, is apparently going to take an interview for the OC job in Houston, so we'll keep an eye on that. Of course, we've told you the Commanders' top end of their staff is going to be able to stay in place with Cliff staying and obviously guys like Lance Newmark in the front office, but we are awaiting to see if the guys down staff get poached for bigger roles, as there's certainly going to be a lot of interest in what happened this year in Washington. Okay, Varun is with us because we need to do a deep dive into the Wizards. And
Do we have to?
I mean, look, man, we have not, truthfully, we have not talked about the Wizards in basically a month because of the Commanders' playoff run. And unfortunately, all we've missed in that time is a lot of losing. A lot of losing. If they lose tonight, they will have lost their 16th straight game for the second time this season, their third time in 2 years. And I guess here's my big kind of question as someone who, unfortunately for you, has lived this every day as a reporter. Like, Michael and Will promised to be more competitive. The whole premise behind hiring Brian Keefe was he got them more competitive in the second half of last season. We know the roster is insanely young. We know that some of the individual pieces are actually performing pretty well. Alex Sarr might be the favorite for Rookie of the Year. So how do we square the lack of competitiveness, and does that actually matter with kind of the long-term goals going on here? Or is there starting to be some concern that there's a failure in the system?
The two things that I look at immediately when I worry about, or when I think about the losing issues this season, is one, you do have to account for the fact that Kyle Kuzma has missed a lot of time. Malcolm Brogdon has also missed a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And that has led to the young guys playing a lot more. And they have all been varying levels of impressive. But at the same time, they're still 19 and 20-year-olds. And you
Right.
can only expect but so much when they're playing against fully developed players for the most part. So that's one thing. As for how much it matters for the long-term future of the team, I do think it matters to some degree, if only because they have been so explicit about saying that they want to create a winning culture even as they go through this rebuild. I mean, you can build a lot of bad habits by playing losing basketball night after night after night after night, and they're trying to avoid those. There is some worry, I think, that the way things are going could be creating those. I don't think they've formed yet. I don't think you see bad habits forming yet. It's also hard to tell just because so much of the habits we'd be talking about would be things related to their preparation, related to the weight work they're doing, how they approach treatment, all that kind of thing. And those are obviously behind the scenes, but from the limited amounts that I've been able to see, it doesn't look like those have been issues.
Let me ask you this, as someone who has not even watched as much as I typically would because of how bad it's been and how busy we've been otherwise. But, like, we saw them earlier in the year get real frisky with some guys, right? Like, we saw the competitiveness, and, like, Draymond, when he was here, is kind of the most famous example, right, of, like, oh, yo, those kids are yapping. Like, there's a competitiveness to them. Has the losing worn off any of that edge? Or is the competitiveness level night to night in terms of intensity and at least attempts at effort, is that still there the way it was earlier in the season as the losing has continued to stack up?
It's hard to tell just because effort is pretty hard to gauge on the basketball court unless it's blatant in either direction. They're near the bottom of the league in a decent amount of the hustle stats at NBA.com tracks. I don't know how much I read into that, to be honest, just because some things like loose balls recovered could, in theory, be measuring something, but something like deflections is also, if you're a good defensive team, if you have defensive talent, you're going to force people into worse situations, you're going to force them into, making ill-advised passes, all that kind of thing, and maybe you're not doing that just because of a lack of talent. obviously one of the main corollaries that people look at with this team is the Thunder. And so I looked at the Thunder's ranks because the Thunder are near the top or at the top of the league when I checked this a couple weeks ago in most of those hustle stats. So I looked at that, and the Thunder were high, the Wizards were low. But I looked about 3 or 4 years ago, whatever their coach Mark Daigneault's first year was,
Yeah.
and they were pretty low at that point too. So it might just be hustle stats might not actually be measuring hustle. So it's hard to tell.
Right.
The players do not seem beaten down is one thing. And I think I wasn't here last year, but from the conversations I've had, it does seem like at points last year, the losing festered a bit more than it has this season. And you see, I think this was... They have had 2 very prolonged losing streaks this year. They're at 15 right now. They had a 16-game one earlier this season. During that losing streak, I remember asking Corey Kispert, who's been here for a while, obviously, what was different, because they talked all in the offseason about how they had a bunch of guys and a bunch of a culture that would help them withstand early adversity, and they really felt that early adversity. They started 2-2, and then they lost 16 straight, and Chris Kispert basically said, even though things are bad, nobody's happy. It's not toxic. People aren't sniping at each other. I'm curious to see if that's still continuing. 45 or 46 games into the season. It is really tough to say how bad it is. Here's what I think about what this means for the long-term future of the rebuild.
Yeah.
It's not good. You don't want this.
Right.
Even if you want to maximize your lottery odds, you don't want it to feel like this.
Right.
And I think if you, just go back to what Will Dawkins said in his preseason press conference, right? He said, in so many words, we hit a lot of individual goals last year. We didn't have as many team goals, and we want to hit more of those team goals. Brian Keefe, in his his media day press conference, talked about how they did a lot. They played a lot more clutch games last year. They've got the worst point differential in the league by far. I think they're minus 14 points per game. No other team is in double digits.
Right. Typically, just for the opposite side of it, if there's a team that has a double-digit plus point differential, they're an automatic championship contender.
100%.
There is a stronger correlation with that of this team kicked everyone's ass all year than basically anything else you can look at, which makes sense. It's the scoreboard, which is, of course, the point, especially in the NBA, where you have 7-game series, there's less randomness in the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that you are an anti-championship team on that, I think, is obviously worrying. And that's kind of my thing, right, when this all started, I wanted to try to judge them based off their metrics, because I trust that Michael and Will have been around this sport and this league long enough to know what they are doing, that they are looking at certain things, and if they feel confident that it's headed the right direction, okay, by year 3, let's have a chat. Because if you're still, if you're a 10-win team in year 3, okay, that's not cool. But first couple of years, I'm willing to actually, I'll tell you even the analogy I've used directly is Varun Shankar from the Washington Post is here with us on set at Capital One Arena. You don't look at a new building being built as they're tearing the old one down and being that's a hideous new building. And they are still in the deconstruction phase, whatever that means for them. So I'm not going to judge the new building by the deconstruction or the construction side of the old building. But they did tell us certain things about competitiveness this season, and they are clearly not hitting those marks. And that's, I think, what I struggle to square and what I would be so curious to get out of them if I could inject Brian Keefe or Will Dawkins or Michael Winger with truth serum.
Yeah, I don't think they cared as much about the individual wins and losses for the individual wins and losses. I think they cared about them more as trying to cultivate a positive environment for these young guys to grow. And for what it's worth, it does not seem like whatever on-court struggles the team has had this year and the minimal amount of wins they've had has negatively affected the development of Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington, and Keyshawn George. They have all been reasonable levels of... it would not surprise me if all 4 of them are regular, at minimum regular NBA rotation players into their second contracts. Right? I think they've all shown an ability to stick in the league, and that's something, if at all. Where I'm kind of at the big picture stage of the rebuild, I agree with you that it's too early to say anything definitive. I have not seen anything yet that raises big red alarm bells. I have not seen anything that brings my concern level down to 0 if I was a Wizards fan. Where I'm at is, this is not good.
Right.
I can
It's
say
bad
that.
ball.
Yes, it's bad ball. I don't. If you hit in the lottery and you hit on a star draft pick, sometimes in either this year or next year, now whatever happened this year doesn't really matter. But you
Right.
need to hit on that star, because right now none of the young players you have drafted have shown. And they could show it for the rest of the season and beyond. Like, they're all super young. There's so much time. But none of them have had a season that makes you think this is someone who can be a number one player on a really good team.
Which the bar for that is you have to be a top 10 player in the league.
Yes.
And Bilal might be a future all-star. I think Sarr has shown potential future all-star for what he can do defensively if his offensive game rounds. But you know pretty quick typically if the guy's going to be at that level. And there are guys like Shea took a second, in getting the opportunity in OKC, and he was super young when he came into the league. But you typically know pretty quick that some of those guys are going to be real special.
Nobody on the team has had a season as good as what Brandon Miller did last year for Charlotte. Which is you need whoever you draft next year or the year after. I think you need them to come in and have a season as exciting and intriguing as the one that Brandon Miller did last year. That's just a random data point that I'm using.
Yeah.
But
but that's a great one.
a guy who generates real excitement and shows flashes of being at minimum a high.
If I told you, or I said hey, you can have $100 if you get this bet right. The Washington Wizards will have an all-star next season. True or false? And from the guy now, not they draft Cooper Flagg and Flagg is a rookie all-star.
Okay.
Because it would be another way to do it. It still feels like their best chance at an all-star in 2026 is they draft Cooper Flagg and he's awesome immediately. Versus Bilal or Alex or Bub or Keyshawn developing into that guy next year.
Maybe Bilal. I would maybe put 20 of those dollars on Bilal, just because I think if he gets a full off season, where this past summer he went to the Olympics for a bit, he didn't get as much time to do some individual skill work. I think if he has some more time to hone that shooting, I really do think that if the shooting comes in for him, we were talking about a really good player.
Yeah.
That's a big if. But
there's also a really big difference in a really good player who's the third best guy on a championship team versus the guy who's second or first.
I think.
And he's still I just think a second guy is possible for Bilal, but that is the high end, and
Probably.
I wouldn't bet on it. I would bet more towards a 3, which means you still need 2 more guys.
I agree.
Or Sarr to turn into. Something that he obviously, his instincts are crazy. I don't know. Sarr's the one that's super intriguing to me.
He is. The shooting was there for a hot minute. It seems to have gone away a little bit of late. His defense has been intriguing, but not always a positive impact. I think that's I am not worried about Alex Sarr's defense in any way, to be honest. I think that
he's just young.
He's just young. He's going to put on more weight to his frame. He's going to get a better idea of timing and all those things, and he's going to be I don't know how good of a defensive player, but an above-average defensive player at minimum. And again, Bub and Keyshawn have both shown really good basketball sense. You watch them play, and you're I see the outline of how this is a good player moving forward. With Bub, it is, the pull-up jumper has been a real threat. He has positional size. He has the tenacity to be good on defense. So you could really see, again, some kind of role player and a really nuanced pick and roll ball handler. That's a really intriguing skill set. With Keyshawn, it's again size, versatility, defense, switching, his connecting. He's a really good passer. One thing that's really interesting is they're kind of giving him some more on-ball reps as the season goes on, and I think part of that is they're trying to see what they have in these guys still, and that's also what makes it a little bit difficult because they're using these games as development opportunities. They're using these games as experimental opportunities in a lot of ways, and so they are trying to win, but it's not quite as cut and dry in that way. They're not maximizing. Their decisions are not wholly bent on maximizing winning in the way that the Lakers would be.
For sure. So you mentioned that by and large the team has their demeanor hasn't changed. It doesn't seem like there's any toxicity in the locker room and all that kind of stuff. The one thing that had bubbled up, I think it was last week, was Kyle Kuzma he had a night where he had I think a season high in terms of shots and points, and he basically said afterwards I kind of got sick of doing the development thing, and I went out and just played like me. And he had his best night of the season individually, but it was amongst just another bunch of losses here. What was that like to cover that conversation, presuming that you were there for that? And what was the aftermath, the repercussions for the first time that in the year and a half that we've been going through this, someone kind of stepped out of line?
There were no external repercussions that we could see. Kuzma did not get removed from the starting lineup. He didn't get disciplined in any way. It was kind of interesting that the game after he says that, I think he took under 10 shots. I think Kuz is frustrated by the losing. I think he understands what timeline his career is on, and I think there's some level of frustration with where the team is going. And it is easy to want to. It is easy to want to support the development when you're not having to give anything up. I think Jordan Poole's taken more shots per game than Kyle Kuzma has, but they have come more naturally within the flow of the offense just because the offense is tailored in a lot of ways to make Jordan Poole playing his to unlock Jordan Poole in some ways.
Right.
Kyle has been moved out of the situations he was doing over the last couple of years, and a lot of, he said this, a lot of the plays that were run for him at one point are now being run for the young guys. That makes sense if you're the Wizards. You got to get these guys reps. That's
right.
That's the overarching goal of the season. But I understand his frustration in that. I mean, it's a player and a team that are at two different points in their timelines,
right.
And you're just seeing the inevitable clash of that incongruity.
So that brings us to, Varun, the trade deadline. Wow, how did we get here? The trade deadline is the 6th, I believe it is, which is coming up, next Friday, I believe, which now is easy to keep track of. Apparently now it's just the Friday of Super Bowl week, because I remember being in Vegas last year for the Super Bowl, and the trade deadline was about to hit, and we had luckily scheduled Noah Eagle, who we had scheduled because he was calling the Super Bowl for Nickelodeon, but he also obviously calls Nets games and was well-versed on the NBA. So I was like, hey, you ready to talk about touchdown, slime, and also the NBA trade deadline? So Noah was nice enough to go through all that stuff with us. But, last year they passed on trading Kyle. They passed on trading Tyus, which is I think a hotly contested thing on Wizards Twitter, for instance, but I don't know is actually the wrong move. They missed out on some second-round picks, but they have a million of them, and the stuff he did the rest of the year here in terms of how he poured into the young guys and all that kind of stuff mattered, but certainly didn't maximize the asset. How do you think they approach this trade deadline with guys like Kuzma, Poole, if there's any interest there, Malcolm Brogdon, Jonas, Valanciunas specifically has been arguably the best player this season. He's on a 3-year deal that's really affordable. So, I think they don't trade him for at least a first-round pick if he's on the market at all. That contract for that caliber of player, if you're a contender, and your pick's at the end of the 20s anyway, what are we talking about in terms of the names that you expect to move, the names that you don't expect to move?
So let's start with Valanciunas. Because I think his contract and his skill set make him reasonably attractive to a contending option. Now, here's the thing with JV. He's not an every team player, and he's not an every situation player. You can play him off the court because he is a little bit more immobile. He's a little older. Teams can pick on him defensively. So that, he fills a very specific role, and he can easily be taken out of the game. So
right.
I don't think they're going to get too much for him if they decide to make a move, even though that contract is really affordable.
And to be clear, they love him here, right?
They love him.
That was one of the things in talking to some folks this offseason in the front office. They were like, we kind of messed up some of the vet stuff last year. A lot of it was some of the guys they inherited, where they didn't really know exactly what all those guys were about. And this year, they made it a priority to get the right vets. And we saw this for the Commanders with guys like Wagner and Ertz, and it's that's really valuable when you get it right. Valanciunas is that guy for them.
They really like him. I think he's just a really good personality guy, very funny, keeps the mood up. I think he is really good for Alex in a lot of ways. I think that is a little less impactful now just because I think a lot of that benefit came with how he would... I think some of it was just going up against a guy who's 265 pounds was good experience for Alex during training camp and practicing. They're not going to practice as much as the season goes on.
Right.
So with Valanciunas, I wrote about this recently in the Washington Post. Check out that.
Yeah, I heard of it.
Yeah,
it's pretty good. Pretty good.
And I was just looking at, for Valanciunas and Brogdon, I looked at some analogs as trades to see what they could expect because it's hard to gauge what the value is for these guys. I looked at Mason Plumlee, who got traded a couple years ago to from Charlotte to the Clippers.
Okay.
Charlotte only got a 2028 second-round pick for Plumlee, who was averaging similar numbers to Valanciunas, but was on an expiring contract. So even if you inflate that up a little bit, you could get a little bit more. I think Steven Adams, who had another, like he got traded in the middle of a season where he was out for the season, but he had another year for about 12.5 million on the books, and he went for, I want to say, 3 second-round picks. So I don't think they're going to get a first for Valanciunas, just because he's in a pretty narrow situation. They got a first for Gafford last year, but I think Gafford's a better player.
Right. Gafford's a lot younger, too.
Right. That's also a big part of it. Brogdon is also interesting because he probably has the best on-court impact of any Wizard, just in terms of what he can do steadying the game, getting everyone organized. It's kind of like, I hear this a lot when you have a rebuilding team that doesn't have a quarterback, right? You sometimes want to get a replacement-level quarterback in there just so you can evaluate everybody else in the offense.
Right. Brogdon's that guy.
Brogdon is that guy. He, at the very minimum, and I think he's a really good influence on Bub. I think he helps Jordan too, as he kind of tries to do more of like the point guard, like traditional point guard duties. But the thing with Brogdon is he's got a $22.5 million contract for the rest of the season, and it's an expiring deal. So if the Wizards ship him out, they're going to have to take back some level of salary. And if they're going to take on a multi-year commitment in salary, you have to wonder how good the draft capital they are getting is to overcome the negative salary that they would be taking on and the intangible effects of losing Brogdon that you get by trading him away. And I don't know how much they're going to get from Brogdon either, because if you look at the Dennis Schroeder trade earlier this year, Schroeder has had a better season than Malcolm, but he only went for, I think, a couple second-round picks from Brooklyn to Golden State. So if you're not getting real, I think a second-round pick is valuable to some extent, but it's still a second-round pick, and they don't really amount to much a lot of the time. And like you said, Washington already has a lot of them.
Yeah.
If you're Washington and you have to give up these guys that are good veteran presences, and in the case of Brogdon, potentially take back a not great contract,
right?
Unless you're getting a first-round pick, I don't know if that's worth it.
Right. I think guys like Brogdon are also interesting, and then we'll close with Kuz here in a second. But the other thing to watch for Washington over the next week is, can they play facilitator for another trade? Right.
100%.
Can you have two teams that want to make a trade that they can't without the Wizards because they need someone to take on money, and the Wizards are like, we'll take on your money for the price of a first-round pick. You two can make your big trade if you throw us a first for helping you get it across the line. So that's something where also, because the salaries have to match in NBA trades and all this silly math gymnastics that has to happen, if you need a $22 million piece to go into a trade, hey, Washington, we need a Malcolm Brogdon-sized trade filler. Okay, the big trade that I think at this point, because of kind of the last two conversations we've had, a player that actual has potential first-round value, and Kuz at this point, I think his patience is maybe wearing out with this whole rebuild thing that he was initially in on. Where are we at with him and the trade deadline, and how likely is it that 10 days from now, Kyle Kuzma is still a Wizard?
I think it's more likely than not, but I'm probably saying 60-40.
That he is still here?
I think, let's say 65-35, he's still a Wizard after the deadline. One reason, again, big contract, you'd be taking back some level of money. It's less of an issue for Kyle because he's already a multi-year deal. And so you're not, with Brogdon, you just get $22.5 million off the books at the end of this year, so it's free money, essentially, right? With Kuzma, it's not that simple. The other thing is, the Wizards know that Kyle Kuzma is their best asset. And they also know that Kyle Kuzma's having the worst season of his career, or the worst season he's had in a really long time, definitely since he's come to Washington. His value could not be lower. He's shooting badly from three. He's shooting badly from the free throw line. He's had a tough season. Part of that is injury related. Every time it seems like Kuzma is getting into a bit of a groove, he gets injured, and it's been just a really frustrating first season for him in that way. In addition to the role change he's had to go under, playing more off the ball for a team that's prioritizing the development of young players. Because of that, if you look at how the Wizards value Kuzma overall, because of his contract, because of the fact that he's their best trade piece right now, and the fact that he's had such a bad season, I wonder if just the values don't intersect well enough at this point, and the Wizards say, listen, we've got more time on his contract, we are under no rush to trade him, we'll hold him.
That's definitely possible, and then you could see a trade this summer, or who knows? Maybe maybe there's another Kyle Kuzma interview coming at Media Day for me next year. Varun, thanks, dude.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me
Appreciate you. You can read him, of course, in the Washington Post. Go to WashingtonPost.com/sports. Coverage tonight of the Lakers here in town. LeBron. I mean, who knows how many more times we will see him here. Obviously, he's playing tonight. Is Bronny playing tonight? Is he with the Lakers right now?
I honestly don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
I know
not
AD's
his
not playing.
Yeah, AD's out tonight, so that's a bummer. But maybe it gives the chance for the Wizards to avoid a 16th straight loss.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.